When we think of Great Britain's global power, we usually think of the past, right? The empire, all of that. But what if that's, well, completely wrong? Today, we're diving into a pretty provocative idea that argues Britain is still a massive, disruptive force in the world, a kind of hidden shadow warrior. Let's see exactly how this argument gets built.
So here's the big question our source material puts on the table. Is Britain just a tiny, rainy island with a really impressive history? Or is it something else entirely? A covert global power, a shadow warrior that's still punching way, way above its weight? This is the core idea we're going to unpack.
Okay, so if this theory is even close to being true, how on earth does the UK pull it off? How does it project so much power? The author points to a very specific set of tools and assets. Let's break them down, starting with the power of the story.
First up, narrative control. The author claims that institutions like the BBC, with its gold-plated global reputation, are actually a key tool for, and this is their word, gaslighting the world, pushing a specific agenda while looking totally objective. It's presented as this incredible instrument of soft power.
But it's not just about words and stories, right? According to this thesis, Britain's influence is built on an absolutely immense financial foundation. And the source points to one place in particular, colonial India. It claims an estimated $45 trillion was extracted, a staggering number that's basically presented as the seed money for Britain's lasting global financial power. And that financial muscle is still very much a thing today. I mean, London is the world's second biggest financial center, and it holds a massive chunk of the world's gold for other countries. But the author notes that some cracks are starting to show. There are these whispers about gold leasing, the idea that the physical gold might not even be there. And moves like freezing Russian assets have started to ding its reputation as a totally reliable place to keep your stuff. Right, so beyond money, the source brings up this really interesting concept of imperial fortresses. Now, back in the day, these were literal military bases like Gibraltar that protected power. But the argument here is that the idea has evolved. Today, it's contended that entire countries in the Anglosphere, we're talking Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and yep, even the United States, are basically acting as modern imperial fortresses, supercharging British influence around the globe. Okay, so you've got the narrative, the money, these fortresses. How does this all get used in a real conflict? To explain the UK-US relationship, the author pulls out this really vivid metaphor from the movie Mad Max and argues the war in Ukraine put it on full display. So this is the master-blaster dynamic. The UK is cast as master, the cunning, calculating brain behind the whole operation. And the US, well, in this view, the US is blaster, the huge, powerful enforcer who provides all the muscle, often without really knowing whose interests they're serving, acting as an unwitnessed vassal. So how did this supposedly play out in Ukraine? Well, the source points to two key moments. First, it's alleged that the prime minister at the time, Boris Johnson, personally flew in to scuttle a potential peace deal right at the beginning of the war. And then, a bit later, a 100-year partnership gets signed, securing access to Ukraine's incredibly valuable mineral resources. The author basically presents this as proof of a long-term economic goal that was more important than peace. And this isn't just about Ukraine. The argument then zooms out to the Middle East, claiming that Britain has been running a similar playbook for decades, acting as a key driver of instability in the region to serve its own goals. Let's just walk through the timeline the author lays out. It starts in 2002 with Tony Blair's dossier on Iraq. Then it jumps to 2011, where the UK co-drafts the UN resolution that gave the green light for the intervention in Libya. A year later, MI6 allegedly starts secretly arming opposition groups in Syria. And every single one of these cases, the source argues Britain wasn't just tagging along, it was a key architect of regime change. So what was the end result? This is the crucial point for the author. The claim is that in Iraq, Libya, and Syria, these interventions all had the same outcome. Relatively stable, if definitely authoritarian, secular countries were torn apart. And what filled the vacuum? Religious extremists. The result was chaos and a devastating loss of human rights, especially for women and minorities. But here's the thing about grand strategies. Sometimes they blow back in your face. And that's the final piece of this whole puzzle. The argument that these decades-long plans are now starting to backfire on Britain in ways nobody ever expected. The author calls this the reverse master blaster, and it's a wild idea. The argument begins with Pakistan, which was allegedly set up as one of these British imperial fortresses. But here's the twist. Decades down the line, communities from that very fortress have gained major political power inside Britain, influencing domestic policy in ways the original strategists could have never, ever imagined.
And it's not just an internal thing. The author also suggests the American blaster is starting to get wise to the game, pointing to political friction, like the pretty frosty relationship between Donald Trump and UK leaders. The source argues the US isn't so willing to just blindly supply the muscle anymore.
And that brings us to the author's final, pretty stark verdict. It invokes this centuries-old nickname for Britain, Perfidious Albion, which basically means a treacherous or disloyal England. In the author's eyes, it's a label that perfectly describes Britain's role in the world, even today. So where does that leave us? What should you take away from all this? The source lays out a really detailed, if definitely controversial case for Britain as a hidden and disruptive global power. But is it a compelling theory that finally connects the dots of global chaos? Or is it a biased narrative that's just seeing conspiracies where there aren't any? As always, we present the argument and we leave the final judgment up to you.